Welcome to this year's MTSS Summit titled Where MTSS Meets Mental Health. This year, we're focusing on how to integrate a continuum of mental health prevention and early intervention services into schools. Turns out that schools are the primary place where young people access needed mental health supports. And research clearly shows that improved student mental health and well being are critical enablers to their not only school success, but their life success. My name is Clay Cook, and I'm the Chief Development Officer at Character Strong. I'm here today with Dr. Tinisha Parker, who is the Executive Director of Student Services in Gwinnett County Public Schools. She has over 2 decades of experience as an educator, serving in all kinds of roles, from a classroom teacher to a school counselor and a district administrator. As the executive director, she's able to lean into her passion of supporting students who face challenges that threaten their well being and academic success. She does so through prevention and focusing on how do we build prevention supports, as well as creating access to early intervention services. She obtained her doctorate in industrial organizational psychology, which I imagine we'll get into a little bit on how that system thinking shows up into MTSS. And a key operative term in MTSS is systems of support. Welcome to the summit, Dr. Parker.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Very excited to be here and talk about one of my passion points.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited for the audience to be able to hear from you. You work in a really large system, and anybody who says they have it figured out how to go into a big system and just poof, bring this to magic, is probably not telling the truth. So I think there's a lot of wisdom that you can share with people who are trying to navigate this work as we engage in systems change. I want to spend a couple of minutes, though, talking about your story, your journey. How'd you end up in education? And then an extension of that, like how is MTSS something that you're passionate about nowadays?
Okay, absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity to answer this question. My mother was an educator. For all of us, and most of us, our parents or people in our families are our first teachers, and my mom was certainly that. But she was an actual teacher too, and she was a special education teacher. So she was always, working with me and my brother with like these little tips and tricks that sometimes my regular teacher in school didn't, always use, right? So I had this secret weapon at home with me. My mom had all these additional tools in her tool belt to kind of help me get things. And so I had, I was pretty successful in school. Had a lot of support at home. I went on to study education, secondary education at the University of Georgia. And that's where I got my education degree and came out and started teaching. I taught social studies for a few years, developed some curriculum in the online platform that we had. We were doing online school back in 2002, 3. So this is well before the pandemic.
Trailblazer.
So I had some experience with curriculum development, as well as testing assessment. Was able to write some of the curriculum pieces and assessment pieces for an exam we called the Gateway, which was a writing document-based exam, but it focused on science and social studies. So those were the content areas, but you had to use language arts throughout to write a cohesive component. And so I had a really strong foundation in both instruction as well as my content area. So I thought, and love teaching. Kids would always come to me though with additional needs. I remember a kid needing eyeglasses. I remember a kid that was suicidal, and this was prior to us having an in-district protocol for that. So it was just, all the teachers came together and kind of put together a plan for the student, but it wasn't at that point led by any district guidance or directives. And then in my first year of teaching, I lost my own brother to suicide. And so it really changed kind of my focus of education. I did know kids were struggling already with so many different things that got in the way of their education, because I saw that daily. And I ended up being a person that they could feel comfortable coming and talking to. So I was always a liaison, connecting them to the school counselor, sometimes the school social worker or a coach or someone to help them. And after that tragedy with my brother, that significant loss, and it was only two of us, so it was pretty devastating for me. I wanted to be that person that coordinated the change for kids. And so I went back to school and I became a counselor. And so gosh, 2007 is when I started the counseling program, and I started teaching in 2000. So I've been more outside of the classroom in a support role than I did when I was in the classroom, but I learned a lot of important skills and had a lot of opportunity to grow those even in that short amount of time. And so I find myself working in my sweet spot. One of the things I was passionate about was making sure that there were systems in place that knew how to respond to kids who in this case, in my brother's case, had severe and critical need for support. And that truly was my focus in the beginning. You know, how do we catch these kids who are at most need? As I grew in the profession and as I grew to understand the model of multi-tiered systems of support, I learned that there's a lot of work that we need to do and should be doing on the front end to prevent, or that could prevent, some of these kiddos from even rising to the level of needing that significant support. And so I put my brain to kind of thinking about how can that be done. And this was before our department was even created, right? So I was only working at this point in time with counselors in the district. How can we make sure our systems are in place? And we, as a district, embarked upon multi-tiered systems of supports where we became a pretty significant player in what we call student success. And not that we haven't always been, but now we had the recognition of, you know, students' well-being directly impacts their student success and their outcomes. And so we had a new stage, and we worked as a district to figure out what needed to happen. And so that, to your point, that PhD in IO psychology definitely came into play, because there were some very significant things that had to happen. We had to establish baseline understandings, baseline skill sets. What are those skill sets going to be? How are we going to deliver those? What are our teacher expectations? What are our student behavior expectations? Like, there were just a lot of things that we had to focus on from a district level and make sure we had in place to move forward in that direction.
Well, stories are powerful. Your story is a powerful one. I'm sorry to hear about your
Yeah.
brother. The importance of this work. Behind every educator is a story, and
Mhm.
that story fuels passion and purpose. And in my opportunities to be able to interact with you over time, the passion, you wear it on your sleeve, and people are better off for it. So I just want to thank you for being a leader and thinking through systems and being able to put those systems in support so more kids can access the prevention, and on the other side of that, the intervention supports they need. At Character Strong, we talk a lot about kind of low burden, high impact practices, especially at like the tier one level. And tier one, you know, within MTSS is our language for prevention work. Now, you also spend a lot of time thinking about this, like MTSS tier one. If there was one tier one practice that you think could chip away at preventing mental health difficulties or things that are barriers to student learning that every educator implements for every student, what would one tier one practice that you would want, you believe should be in every environment?
Oh, there's so many, but if I had to pick one,
It's an
um,
unfair question. I'm sorry.
if I had to pick one, I would say the one most impactful thing that a teacher could do, literally, and it may be the easiest, is literally to greet their kids at the door. And I say this because you get an opportunity you can feel energy, right? You know, you say good morning and you get a grumble back. There's something there, right? You might need to find out a little bit more. You might do another tester where, you know, later in the class, you do another type greeting or engagement to see if it's that same grumble or if it was something else. You get a different response. But I think just simply greeting kids at the door allows and this isn't the only thing. You said if there's a one, I could choose one
Yeah,
because I
yeah,
had to choose
exactly.
one. Now, this is by far not the only thing.
Mm,
But I do believe from the very beginning, you get information as an educator on kind of where your student may be, right? So if I get to feel that Tinisha, something's off with Tinisha today, I'm not going to, in the classroom, start asking Tinisha, cold calling her, right? Because I feel like she might not be in a place where she wants to respond, or this might not be a good time for Tanisha. And I think we miss the opportunities as teachers sometimes to just miss those basic social cues from kids, and standing in the hallway, seeing their faces, smiling to see if you get a smile back, saying good morning or good afternoon or how are you doing to see if you get anything back is good, solid, and important information. And I think we get so caught up in the hustle bustle of getting class done that small thing we forget to do. And again, I don't think by any means that's the only. I think consistency, I think check-ins, I think a lot of other stuff, but I do think that's the very first, right at the beginning of class type thing, that can be done, that gives a lot of information to a teacher.
It's hard to argue with that. You know, I was at the University of Washington. We did randomized control trials on positive gradings at the door, and we replicated findings. You get a 20% increase in academic engaged time on the back end, and you can cut disruptive behaviors in half. But it really takes, like you're saying, the word consistency with that practice,
Mhm.
because we often know what we need to do, but the question is, do we consistently follow through with that practice so
Mhm.
students are feeling welcome, or we can do that little temperature check to modify how we support a kid during the learning environment.
Mhm.
Really important practice, and obviously not the only thing we should be doing. We don't want to
Definitely
turn
not.
school into like trust falls and ropes courses that we're
Right.
ultimately we need to instruct and we need kids to engage
Absolutely.
deeply in learning. So there's definitely more to it than that. I want to get your thoughts on this idea of like MTSS obviously integrating what we do academically, socially, emotionally, and behaviorally. How do you see mental health fitting into an MTSS framework?
I see it as an integral part, and we say mental health, we can say mental wellness, we can say mental strength, we can say resiliency, we can
Mhm.
say a lot of these different words, but basically it is the ability, for me, it boils down to the ability for a student to really engage with you, to be present in mind and body, to
Yeah.
engage with whatever the teacher is doing at the front of the classroom or as they're walking through. So they can be teacher of the year, delivering the best lesson ever. But if a kid is not in a space to receive that, they don't get it.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think it is our responsibility as adults to understand that kids have bad days, kids go through things, that they don't yet quite have all of the skills to navigate and to manage. And as the adults in the building, as the caretakers of these young people, and dare I say, their future and our own,
Mhm.
we have a responsibility to kind of be on the lookout for things that threaten their ability to engage successfully with instruction. Sometimes that's the loss of a family member. Sometimes it's the loss of a friendship. Sometimes it's literally the loss of a goldfish, right? You don't know, what loss and how that impacts a student who's never experienced loss
Mhm.
before. Sometimes it's feeling that they're not smart enough in the
Mhm.
classroom, but as adults in the building, as district level leaders, as building level leaders, as classroom leaders, and every single teacher is a leader in their building, they are building leaders. We have to shore up our classrooms, and that space has to be a place of welcomed opportunity for every single kid in that classroom, and not welcome our opportunity only for success, because most of our kids get to success because they made a mistake the first time, right? And they had to do it again. So our classrooms have to be an environment where if you make a mistake, you get a chance to do it again, and figure out what didn't work and leverage some new skills or learn a new skill to make sure you are successful the next time, not only in academics, but also in behavior and in our social interactions. We didn't always know how to share before we got to kindergarten. We had to learn how to do that. Someone had to tell us over and over, Tanisha, it's somebody else's turn to use crayons. And maybe I was mad about it, but I eventually learned to take turns, right? So I think we need to approach not only the hard skills in our classrooms with the expectation that a student may not get it right the first time, and so we're going to have to redirect, re-instruct, retry. We also need to take that approach with how they're able to be in community too.
I hope people who are watching this go back and rewind it and play it for others, because it is the why. What you're saying, like we have to prioritize this work, and we're teaching young people skills to be able to manage self within the context of learning the academics, because the combination of the two are ultimately needed to go on and move and shake in life and to create a better world. And it just was struck by how clear you, in a compelling way, you make that case for why we need to integrate this work. And whatever term we use to call it, like resiliency, mental, it's ultimately kind of the human work to cultivate young people's development in this area. And we're holding kids accountable to their learn. They need to learn in these areas just like we want to hold them accountable for learning academically. Um,
Absolutely.
Love what you said there. So I want to turn it to now. Sometimes this work, it can be challenging. It's not like it's not without constraints or challenges that educators face. What are some common ones that you've observed among educators when integrating kind of mental health supports within an MTSS framework?
One of the things we ran into early on, and we really had to work on the mindset in terms of whose responsibility is it to build relationships with students in classrooms. I think, one of the things we combat just in general is everyone has so much on their plate already. When you introduce something that may seem new or novel for some, which comes second nature to others, because we all know those teachers in the building that every single kid flocks to, that this teacher has no discipline issues with any kid, no matter who you put in their classroom. We all know those teachers, in our buildings, right? One of the things we had to work with was when we introduced new skills, or when we wanted to make sure that we set a baseline of skill sets that were in all of our teachers, making sure people didn't feel like they were taking on somebody else's job. Making sure they didn't feel like they felt responsible to be a counselor for kids, or the social worker for kids. Now, mind you, every single school district in Georgia, and I would imagine this is across the state, we have mandated reporter guidelines, right? You are obligated, if you know something is going on with the kid, to tell someone in the building to help support. That never changed. But what we were trying to do with our staff in the building, when I say staff, I mean teachers, I mean bus drivers, I mean cafeteria workers, I mean custodians, I mean clerical workers. We wanted to establish a baseline of what like social emotional intelligence looked like, what behavior support or positive reinforcement looked like from your seat in that building. So the cafeteria and the clerk, they're not going to have the same type of instruction or guidance around those competencies and qualities as would an administrator or a classroom teacher, who is also having to infuse that into actual instructional strategies. But I would say the biggest challenge was first making sure everyone knew we're not going to expect you to do the work of another position. But what we are expecting you to do is be, one, cognizant of your own wellness, and two, be cognizant and able, by developing these skills, to engage productively with children in your building, no matter who you are. Because if you're an adult in the building, there's a responsibility that we do hold you to around keeping these young people on track, on the straight and narrow, and on a path to success, right? Even if it's, I'm a custodial worker, and I can positively greet a kid in the morning. I can say good morning to a kid just like any other adult in the building can, right? And if I think something was going off, or if I notice something different with the kid, because I may see this kid every morning at 7 a.m. walk through, but today they looked really different. I have the agency and the ability and the expectation to say, hey, this kiddo right here, they're usually happy-go-lucky. Today they looked really down. Just wanted to let somebody know. We wanted to empower everyone in the building to be able to have eyes on kids and be able to report if they felt something was wrong.
Yeah, I love the idea that ownership piece. Like,
Mhm.
who owns the, supporting, the whole child? And everybody has an ownership in this work in terms of how they show up and the things they have control over. We often talk at Character Strong, it's like the starting place is shared clarity. Shared clarity is not only understanding what the practices are, but what is my role as it
Mhm.
relates to implementing those practices. And if we don't have shared clarity, we're not all in the same boat rowing in the same direction. And what
Mhm.
it means is oftentimes kids are not receiving the supports they need because the adults aren't taking up the torch and doing the work. Because a lot of people agree, but then some people get it's not my job itis, and we say not it when we actually mean no, this is all of us. I'm not asking a teacher or a paraeducator to become a counselor, but what we are saying is being aware of ourselves, how we show up and relationally connecting with students based on the time we spend with them. I love the thoughts there around ownership and helping kind of overcome that. That's something we can navigate. It's not something that causes us to get stuck and spin our wheels. We can actually overcome that challenge. Let's
Absolutely.
talk tier two and tier three. Um, tier two and tier three, MTSS gives us language, right?
Mhm.
Tier two and tier three is, I like to think about it as just early intervention. Why do you believe like we need to work towards making tier two and tier three supports available for students who might be struggling with mental health?
Because kids that are struggling at tier 2 or tier 3 aren't learning at optimal levels. They're not learning academically, they're not developing socially at optimal levels. And what we want to see is for all of our kids to truly reach their potential. Once we get to tier 3, not only may not be developing, they really maybe suffering at this
Hmm.
point. And we want to make sure that we have resources on board to provide relief. Sometimes it's crisis relief for students, and that we have procured the appropriate resources to support that type of acute need, and that we've taught our staff and we've built up a level of awareness that people are able to see when students are moving from tier 1 to tier 2. And we don't want our students to move from tier 1 to tier 2 to 3. If anything, we know we may get kids that come into our building at tier 3, right?
Hmm.
And so in addition to the tier 1 supports that we're giving everyone, they came in the building at tier 3. They need support now. We want to be able to immediately address those needs and work with them to try and move them back down to that tier to stabilize some of what's going on as we build up skills for
Hmm.
them to be able to manage their environments or their home life or social life, so whatever is happening more effectively. But we are the guardrails around them, and if it's not us, who then will be there to support these kiddos? We see them 5 days a week, sometimes more if there are Saturday events or activities that are happening. So I feel like schools have a great responsibility, and I don't take it lightly at all. And when we do have the opportunity to intervene, and every now and then we'll hear from a student that lets us know how life-changing an interaction may have been. I feel a piece of success, and every time a counselor shares or a teacher shares a motivating story about a kid saying, like, you saw me, I didn't believe I could until you said this, or you showed me this, or you mentioned that, like, until a teacher or until a counselor or until an AP, someone in the building said or did something to remind that kid of the greatness that they have inside of them and the potential. Like, those are stories that I carry with me, even if it's not my own story with that kiddo, because I'm just so proud of the work that our district has done around helping our entire fleet of personnel develop those skills to engage with students.
I look at MTSS as like an access model. We're trying to organize ourselves as the adults to make sure students access kind of the level and type of
Mhm.
support they need to be well. And what you're speaking is that young people are accessing experiences and support that can alter their life course trajectory. And when you hear
Absolutely.
those stories, it's like, yes, that's what it's all about. We get up in the morning and why we choose this work that's hard and
Mhm.
challenging, and there's all kinds of barriers and constraints where it's for those stories.
Mhm.
It's just fuel.
They're great stories, and sometimes they come back to work in the same system that you work in and remind you
Oh,
that you were their ninth grade geography teacher, and you're like, oh my God, you're a whole grown person now, being
yeah.
extremely successful. So
And you
it's
become part of that person's story, just like you
right.
opened up with a compelling story. We become part of that person's story and
And
narrative.
they're in a position to
That's
give back. They're giving back tenfold. They're influencing lives of kids in their classroom. So it's rewarding. It's challenging. The work in education, wherever you're sitting, is challenging, but it can be so very rewarding.
especially at the tier two and tier three level, kids have pretty big needs, and we're
Yeah.
really mobilizing that support. So I'm going to bring us over the finish line at Character Strong. The one thing we always say is we need to be reminded more than we need to be taught. A lot of the times we need good reminders more than we need to be taught. You first have to learn the thing. But what is a reminder you would want to leave people with today based on kind of the terrain we covered as we wrap things up?
And I heard this, so I don't want to take credit for it, but I can't even remember where I heard it, but it was so impactful. It was like and it said something like you engage with people on a daily basis. You have interactions with an individual every single day. Um, but you don't get to dictate how they remember that interaction.
Hmm.
So what that said to me was that as best as I can, because I don't get to dictate how they remember this action, but for me, what I want to always leave away, a takeaway from interactions is that I brought to this interaction positive energy and good intent, right? And I truly put my best forward for whether it was a project, whether it was a conversation, but just remembering the power of your energy and knowing that you take that with you everywhere you go. Kids feel it, they see it. And we want to make sure that when they reflect on their time with us years and years and years from now, my hope is that they reflect on that time in a positive way. And
Ah.
the only way we can anyway influence that is just be very careful with the energy we take to them.
It boils down as humans, we change in response to experience. And what you're saying is you may not be able to make a kid feel a certain way, but what we can do is help them experience certain supports. And
Mhm.
when they access and experience those supports, it can promote better outcomes. And part of what we're doing through MTSS is designing experiences for students so they can access quality supports that move the needle on outcomes. So, one thing left for our audience, where can people learn more about like the work you do in the school system? Yeah, where can they learn more about what you do?
So yes, we are in Gwinnett County Public Schools, and if you go to gcpsk12.org, that's our district website, and then our student services website. You can search in the search bar and just literally type in student services, and our webpage comes up, and we have our three directors who are doing an amazing job. That there's an outlay and overview of the work that we do, and we present all the time at a number of different conferences around the nation. So we're always happy to share, but also always happy to learn because there's a lot of great work happening out there.
Yeah, I want to say I know our partnership with Gwinnett County Public Schools and your team has been just a real pleasure and honor. You are one heck of a leader. There's a lot to be learned from you and the work that you champion on behalf of the educators, the students, and families you serve. And I know a lot of people are going to find value in this opportunity to speak with you today. So thank you, Dr. Parker.
Thank you. I certainly found value in just being able to, be a part of something that I feel like will reach a lot of people with a number of other individuals that you interview. And I can't wait to watch some of those as well. So thank you.